Snowstorm winds howled around the cabin, pressing waves of white against the glass, as I watched my husband slip into my Jeep with the woman he had chosen over me. In that moment, the world outside turned into a blur of ice and shadow, and I realized with a shaking breath that he had no idea that the trap he thought he set for me was already closing around him instead. He told me I would endure these next few days alone, as if my resilience was a weakness he could exploit. His voice carried the smug assurance of a man who believed he had already won, and I almost let out a soft, broken awe at the cruelty of it. The bandages beneath my nightgown pulled painfully with every breath, a reminder of the surgery that left me fragile, but his indifference cut far deeper than any scalpel, leaving my chest trembling, almost weeping at the sting of it. He had taken my phone, locked me out of our apartment, and drained our savings, believing he had removed every path I could use to fight back. He leaned out of the window and laughed, an easy ha-ha-ha that felt like a slap, confident that the isolation of this cabin would ensure his victory. But he did not know the secrets hidden within these walls. He did not know that the very place he thought would keep me powerless held the tools of his undoing. He did not realize that the woman he believed was broken had already put a plan in motion long before he packed his suitcase, a plan that warmed my aching chest with a fierce, rising fire. As his taillights vanished into the storm, a single question remained like a spark in the darkness, flickering inside me with a breathless chill. What had I prepared that would bring his entire scheme crashing down? He was certain that he had won. He never imagined that by the end of this story, he would be the one left speechless, stunned into silence while I stood exactly where he never expected me to rise. Snow continued to drift past the window long after the sound of the engine faded, each flake settling into the silence my husband assumed would swallow me whole. The cold inside the cabin pressed against my skin with a sharpness that reminded me how thin the boundary was between discomfort and danger, and a faint shiver escaped me as my breath rose in quick, uneven clouds. I pushed myself away from the window with a trembling inhale, one hand braced against the wall, the other pressed tightly against the bandages wrapped around my abdomen. The first step sent a jolt of pain up my spine with a low gasp slipping out before I could stop it. A second step forced my knees to buckle, a quiet whimper catching in my throat. The surgeon had warned me that recovery would test every part of my strength, but she had not warned me about the particular weight of moving alone through a space that had suddenly become a prison. The wooden floor creaked beneath my bare feet, each groan echoing through the empty cabin like a reminder that no one would hear me fall if I collapsed. A thought that made my chest ache with a soft, helpless awe. Light flickered from the wood stove in the corner, casting long shadows across the room. My grandmother used to say the shadows here were friendly, guardians of the cabin's history, but today they felt watchful, waiting to see whether I would crumble under the pressure of the morning's betrayal. The firewood stacked neatly beside the stove had been arranged by my husband before he left, not out of care, but because he needed me to survive long enough for his alibi to hold. He had wanted me alive, not safe, and a hollow bitter laugh almost slipped out at the cruelty of that truth. My vision blurred as another wave of pain surged beneath the stitches, forcing me to grip the back of the nearest chair. The rough wood bit into my palm, grounding me even as my thoughts scattered under the weight of exhaustion. I felt the cold sweat gathering on my forehead, dripping down the side of my cheek in slow trails, the sensation mixing with a fragile sting behind my eyes that threatened to spill into weeping if I let my breath falter. The medication he had given me several hours earlier had begun to fade, leaving me exposed to the full fury of my body's healing. The cabin's silence grew heavier the longer I stood there. Outside, the wind whistled through the narrow gaps in the window frames, a low, mournful sound that made the world feel impossibly far away. There were no cars, no neighbors, no cell towers. Snow muffled everything beyond the surrounding trees, turning the landscape into an isolated world where only the sharpest instincts survived. A faint dizziness crept behind my eyes as I made my way toward the kitchen. The pain radiated outward in slow pulses, each one stronger than the last. My steps were careful, deliberate, the way a child might walk across cracked ice, each movement sending a soft, shaky breath past my lips. The distance between the living area and the kitchen was only a few yards, yet it stretched out before me as if the room had expanded while I was not looking. The air smelled faintly of pine sap and the lingering trace of antiseptic from the hospital supplies on the table. The sight of the small plastic bag brought back the memory of the nurse pressing it into my hands 2 days earlier. Her voice patient but firm as she explained how fragile the healing incision would be. She had believed I would be resting in my own bed, cared for by a husband who loved me. She could not have imagined that I would be standing alone in a cabin where the nearest help was miles away and completely unreachable, a thought that made a fragile ache bloom inside my chest. My hands trembled as I reached for the counter to steady myself. Shadows trembled along the wooden walls, swaying with every shift of the firelight. The heater clicked softly, struggling to keep up with the cold that seeped through the logs. I felt each draft as a reminder of how quickly warmth could slip away if I lost the ability to move or tend the flames, the fear of that possibility prickling behind my eyes again. When a sudden cramp tore through my torso, I instinctively clutched at the bandages. My fingers brushed the edge of the dressing, and a hot sting shot through the incision, forcing a sharp exhale through clenched teeth. For a moment the room tilted, and I gripped the counter harder, willing my legs not to give out as a soft, pained sound escaped me. The surgeon's warning echoed with chilling clarity. Any strain, any unexpected movement, could tear the healing tissue. The consequences of such a tear, she had said, could be catastrophic. My breathing grew shallow as I eased myself into the wooden chair by the kitchen table. The world outside the window looked indifferent to my suffering, wrapped in the soft glow of snowfall. Every tree stood silent and still, as if frozen in time, and a tiny ache curled in my chest at the sight. The sky above them was a dull steel gray, heavy with the promise of more snow, and the quiet made my throat tighten with a soft, helpless tremor. The isolation pressed closer, settling into the corners of the room like a physical weight. I had never noticed how large the cabin felt until I was too weak to move freely through it. Every shadow stretched farther than it should have. Every sound felt louder. Every quiet moment reminded me of the reality my husband had created for me. And the thought pulled a faint weeping sigh from somewhere deep inside. He believed I would remain here, struggling through recovery without help, grateful for the crumbs of survival he had allowed. He believed that my strength had limits he could measure, that my endurance could be weaponized against me. He believed that I would spend these hours in fear, in desperation, waiting for his return or simply waiting to fail, and a bitter, shaky laugh almost rose in my throat at how thoroughly he misunderstood me. Pain pulsed through my body in sharp, unpredictable waves, but beneath the physical agony something steadier began to form. The stillness inside me did not resemble surrender. It resembled clarity. It resembled the moment right before a storm reshapes the landscape, and the realization sent a warm surge through my chest despite the cold pressing in. I sat there, breath shallow, body trembling, surrounded by a world that seemed determined to swallow me whole. The isolation he had crafted so carefully pressed in from all sides, but instead of breaking, something inside me strengthened. A quiet, fierce resolve settled behind my ribs, humming like a heartbeat. He believed he had left me powerless. He believed this cabin would silence me. He believed my pain would erase my will. He could not have been more wrong, and the thought stirred a small defiant laugh inside me. Warm light from a different time lingered in my memory as I sat in the quiet cabin. Long before the betrayal, long before the Maldives, long before the stitches across my abdomen forced every breath to tremble, there had been a moment when loving him felt simple. That simplicity was the first illusion I ever believed in, and remembering it sent a soft awe of disbelief through me. Our story began in a bookstore tucked between two crowded cafes downtown, a place that smelled of roasted coffee and aging paper. I remembered the afternoon clearly because everything in my life had felt unremarkable until he stepped into it. He moved through the aisles with an effortless charm, brushing snowflakes from his hair, and the moment our eyes met he smiled in a way that made me feel chosen. He seemed confident, warm, attentive, exactly the kind of man my friends insisted I deserved, and my heart had fluttered with quiet hope. He asked what I was reading, listened closely to my answer, and suggested a book he thought I would enjoy. His attention felt like sunlight after too many days of rain, and the gentle warmth of it made me smile without meaning to. Even then, something small inside me hesitated, but I dismissed the feeling. I wanted to believe that someone so bright could not possibly cast shadows. Early dates felt like stories people told when they described soulmates. He held doors open, remembered tiny details I mentioned, brought lilies to my office when he learned they were my grandmother's favorite. He told me he admired my strength, my independence, my focus. I believed him because he said it with such tenderness, and each compliment made my heart flutter with a soft, hopeful laugh. That tenderness, however, began to shift almost imperceptibly. On one quiet evening, he joked that my job kept me away too much. His tone was light, but something in his eyes suggested he was measuring me, and it made my smile falter just slightly. Another night he asked why I wore muted colors instead of something that showed more personality. He said it was an observation, not criticism. I laughed it off, telling myself that couples grew by challenging each other, though the laugh shook faintly at the edges. The red flags unfolded slowly, disguised as care, disguised as interest, disguised as harmless questions. When we attended a friend's wedding, I noticed how tightly his hand gripped mine when another man complimented my dress. The pressure of his fingers was a strange mixture of pride and possession, and it sent a ripple of discomfort through my stomach. Later that night he told me that he loved how other people admired me, but hated when I gave anyone too much attention. He said it with a half-smile, as though insecurity were endearing, and the uneasy flutter in my chest deepened. I ignored the way my stomach tightened. The cracks grew wider after our engagement. He began suggesting changes to my schedule, claiming he wanted more time together. He pushed me to skip gatherings with friends so we could rest at home. He said it was because he valued our quiet moments, and I wanted to believe that. It did not feel controlling at first. It felt flattering, as though being with me mattered more to him than anything else. And I let myself melt into that warmth with a soft, trusting breath. When we moved into our first apartment together, he insisted I did not need my own workspace. "You can work in the living room," he said. "We should not separate ourselves in different rooms all the time. It kills connection." I accepted his reasoning, telling myself that compromise was part of building a life together, even as a faint uneasy flutter stirred in my chest. He rarely compromised in return, and that truth sent a quiet ache through me long before I dared to name it. My friends began asking if everything was all right. They noticed changes before I did. How I checked my phone nervously when he was not with me, how I hesitated before joining outings he did not approve of, how I brushed off their concerns with excuses I knew were thin. Each excuse left a trembling breath in my throat, because the truth was too heavy to hold at that stage. I loved the version of him I had first met, and I believed that version still existed beneath the surface, even as a small, fragile awe of longing clung to my hope. Marriage seemed to amplify what had been subtle. He scrutinized my choices more openly, corrected me in front of others with a tone that made the corrections feel like obligations. When I expressed discomfort, he said I was overreacting. When I asked for support, he said I was asking for too much. When I cried during an argument, he told me I was being dramatic, and my tears fell in soft, frustrated weeping that I tried to hide. Still, I convinced myself that all relationships had rough seasons, laughing weakly through the pain as though humor would soften the truth. The turning point arrived quietly, in a moment so ordinary that I almost missed how important it was. We were in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when he looked at me with a distant expression and said, "You are capable, but you are not inspiring." The words slid out of him as though he were reviewing a resume, not speaking to his wife, and something inside me froze with a sharp, breathless sting. A cold ripple spread through me, but I swallowed it down. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself love meant forgiveness even when the wound was fresh, even when it made my voice shake when I said goodnight. Months faded into years, and his dissatisfaction grew bolder. He commented on my appearance more frequently, comparing me to women at the gym or colleagues whose lives seemed more exciting. He drifted through our home like a man searching for reasons to be disappointed, and each sigh of his tightened a knot inside my stomach. When he hired a personal trainer, I thought it would be good for him. I encouraged it because I still believed that encouraging him would bring us closer. I could not have known that this decision would open the door for everything that followed, and remembering that now made a small, heartbroken whimper rise in my throat. The first time I met her, she barely acknowledged me. Her bright smile was reserved entirely for him. When I mentioned it later, he laughed and said I was being sensitive, an easy ha-ha-ha that stung far more than he realized. He reassured me that she admired his discipline, nothing more. The reassurance felt thin, but I clung to it because admitting the truth meant unraveling the life I had worked so hard to build. Red flags became warnings. Warnings became patterns. Patterns became truths I could no longer ignore. And each truth pressed heavier against my chest with a trembling breath. Looking back from the dim light of the cabin kitchen, I realized the earliest wound had not been his betrayal in the snow-covered driveway. It had been the moment I silenced my own instincts to protect his image, the moment my heart whispered no while my mouth forced out a quiet, shaky yes. The cracks in our marriage had not appeared suddenly. They had formed slowly, shaped by every comment that diminished me, every choice that isolated me, every moment I swallowed discomfort to keep peace, each sacrifice leaving the faint echo of weeping inside my spirit. The Maldives were not the beginning of the end. They were simply the end of my illusions, and the realization left a long shuddering exhale drifting through the cold cabin air. The shift in him did not arrive with thunder or warning. It arrived quietly, wearing the face I thought I knew. A small remark here, a dismissive laugh there, each one sharpening the edges of a man I no longer recognized. His cruelty did not explode into existence. It seeped into the cracks he had already carved, filling them with a bitterness that made my heart tremble. The first time I truly saw the shadow behind his charm was during a dinner at our home. I had spent hours preparing a meal he once said he loved. The table was set with candles, his favorite wine breathing on the counter. He walked in late, loosened his tie, glanced at everything I had arranged, and asked why I always tried so hard for things that did not matter. He did not say it with anger. He said it with boredom, like my effort embarrassed him. When one of the candles flickered in the draft, he laughed and said the table looked like something a child had put together. A sharp ha-ha-ha that cracked something soft inside me. Nothing I did that evening satisfied him. No detail escaped criticism. By the time dinner ended, even the silence between us felt hostile, pressing against my chest like an unspoken accusation. Another moment surfaced later that month. I had been working on a project for hours when he placed his phone beside me and said, "Look at this." It was a picture of a woman he admired, someone from his gym, posing confidently in bright athletic wear. He pointed at her and said, "This is what motivation looks like." Then he looked at me and added, "You used to have that energy before you stopped trying." The word struck like a slap I never saw coming, and my breath caught with a soft, wounded gasp. They carried no anger, only disappointment, and that disappointment sliced deeper than rage ever could. That disappointed tone became his favorite weapon. He shifted from comments about motivation to comments about appearance. When I tried a new hairstyle, he asked who I was trying to impress. When I bought a dress, he said the color overwhelmed me. When I gained a few pounds during a stressful season at work, he suggested I try intermittent fasting and offered to send articles so I could educate myself. A suggestion that made my throat tighten with quiet, exhausted weeping. One unforgettable morning, he stood behind me in the mirror. I was adjusting the collar of my blouse when his reflection appeared behind mine, eyes cold and calculating. He leaned in close enough that I felt his breath against my ear and said, "You are beginning to age out of your beauty. You should think about what else you have to offer." That was the line I never forgot. A line that sliced through me so sharply I let out a small, stunned breath. It burrowed into my chest and settled there like a shard of ice, leaving a faint trembling sigh behind. The emotional manipulation grew sharper with time. Whenever I questioned something, he twisted the conversation until I apologized. If I expressed discomfort about his late nights, he accused me of being controlling. When I asked why his phone was always face down, he said I was paranoid. If I ever started crying, he looked at me with impatience and asked what I wanted him to do with my emotions, and my quiet weeping only seemed to irritate him further. It became easier to blame myself than confront the reality of who he was becoming. I told myself I was sensitive. I told myself relationships required effort. I told myself I needed to improve. He encouraged that belief, feeding it carefully until I believed that surviving our marriage meant constantly reshaping myself to fit his expectations. A belief that settled over me like a sigh of exhaustion. His cruelty intensified after my surgery. Before the operation, he acted distracted, irritated by the logistics of hospital visits and time off work. In the car ride to the emergency room, as pain carved through my abdomen, he gripped the steering wheel with an expression that belonged to someone inconvenienced rather than concerned. When nurses asked him questions, he responded curtly. When they asked me questions, he sighed loudly, as though my suffering were interrupting more important matters, and I felt a soft, shaking awe of hurt slip through me. After the surgery, while I drifted between consciousness and medication, I overheard him speaking to someone on the phone. His voice was low and steady as he said, "I will be home soon. This is taking longer than expected." I had tried to open my eyes, but the drugs weighed me down, pulling me back into the dark with a helpless whimper. The next morning he barely spoke to me. He scrolled through his phone while the surgeon explained my restrictions, my vulnerability, the dangers of recovery. His only response was a half nod, one that made my heart sink with a trembling ache. When we returned home, he carried the hospital bag with 2 fingers as if it were too heavy. He walked several steps ahead of me, not noticing or not caring how the movement strained my incision. I collapsed onto the couch, breath shaky, and he placed the bag on the floor with a thud that echoed in the quiet room, the sound making my chest tighten with the urge to cry. Something inside him hardened after that. Something inside me softened in response, but not with love. With fear. A slow creeping fear that settled into my bones with each shallow breath. The day he mentioned Natalie for the first time felt like the final puzzle piece snapping into place. He brought her up casually, describing her dedication to fitness and her refreshing energy. He did not speak about her like a trainer. He spoke about her like a fantasy he had begun to animate. When I hesitated at his enthusiasm, he smiled and said I should not feel threatened. The tone was light, but the message was sharp, and it pierced through me with a trembling exhale. A week later, he returned home smelling of a citrus perfume I did not own. When I asked about it, he lifted his eyebrows and said, "You are imagining things," letting out a small chuckle, almost a dismissive ha ha ha, that stung far deeper than I expected. Imagination was easier to believe than betrayal, so I let myself believe it with a shaky swallow. The cruelty sharpened into something unmistakable on the night. He told me I should be grateful he was still trying. He said my lack of spontaneity made him feel trapped. He accused me of being predictable. His voice grew louder as he spoke, emotionless yet firm, as though he were reading a list of flaws he had memorized. At the end he added, "You have become someone I feel responsible for, not someone I feel connected to." The word stripped something bare inside me, leaving a fragile, silent weeping at the edge of my breath. Yet I still stayed. Even now, in the dim light of my grandmother's cabin, I could hear the cruelest line he ever delivered, the one that revealed the truth he had been hiding beneath every dismissive comment and impatient sigh. "Being married to you feels like managing a burden that never stops needing me." That was the moment the man I married disappeared completely, and a hollow ache settled inside me. And in his place stood the man who would leave me alone in a snow-covered mountain, 2 days after surgery, without a phone or transportation, convinced that I would simply endure whatever he placed upon me, never imagining that the quiet trembling in my chest would turn into the force that ended everything he thought he controlled. The morning he executed the final stage of his plan began with a softness so deliberate that it unsettled me before I understood why. He entered the bedroom carrying a tray with oatmeal and water, moving with careful precision, as though he were playing the part of a devoted husband. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, catching on the dust in the air, turning the room into a quiet stage where he practiced innocence, and I felt a faint tremor in my breath at the strangeness of it. He set the tray on my lap and adjusted the blanket around my legs. The gesture should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt rehearsed, leaving a soft ache curling inside my chest. He told me I needed to rest, that recovery required stillness, that the medication might make me disoriented for a while. His tone was warm, but his eyes wandered toward my nightstand more often than they rested on me, each glance sending a small shiver of unease down my spine. My phone sat there face down where I had left it the night before. It looked harmless, small, familiar. I did not think to guard it. I did not yet understand that he saw it not as a device, but as the only remaining obstacle in his escape, a realization that would later make my stomach twist with a quiet, stunned awe. He waited until I lifted the spoon to my mouth before he moved. In one smooth motion, with the ease of someone retrieving his own belongings, he slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. I saw the movement from the corner of my eye. Pain medicine made my thoughts slow, thick, difficult to shape into words. I opened my mouth to question him, but he cut me off with a gentle smile that made my pulse flicker with dread. You need rest, he said. No distractions. He spoke as if he were protecting me. He spoke as if concern shaped his actions. The lie settled quietly between us, tightening around me like a cold breath I could not steady. When he left the bedroom, I heard his footsteps moving through the cabin, the sound steady and purposeful. Drawers opened, cabinets closed. I could not see what he was doing, but each muted sound felt like a countdown, each click sending a shaky exhale through my chest. He organized supplies, stacked firewood, arranged canned goods as though preparing for a storm. It took me several minutes to understand he was preparing for something far more personal. He was preparing to leave me here long enough that his absence would become irreversible, and the realization made a thin, trembling weep rise in my throat. My body ached as I pushed myself upright. The incision burned with a deep, throbbing pain that made my breath catch in a sharp gasp. I attempted to stand, but my legs trembled violently beneath me. I leaned against the wall, waiting for the dizziness to settle, my mind clawing through the haze to piece together the strange unease that had seeped into the room, my heartbeat stumbling with fear. By the time I managed to reach the bedroom doorway, he had already returned. He stood in the center of the cabin with his suitcase beside him, zipped and ready. His jacket was on. His gloves were in his hands. There was no hesitation in his posture, no guilt in his expression. He looked like a man about to catch a flight he had anticipated for months, and the sight made my stomach twist with a soft, disbelieving breath. Then he delivered the announcement he had been rehearsing all morning. I am leaving for the Maldives tonight. The words fell with the finality of a door slamming shut, sending a cold shock ripping through me. I stared at him, unsure if I had heard correctly. He clarified before I could speak. He was leaving with Natalie. The woman he claimed made him feel alive. The woman half my age who until now, I believed was only a misguided threat in my imagination. His words struck harder than the pain beneath my stitches, leaving my throat tight with a trembling whimper. He spoke without shame, without softness, without any acknowledgement of the surgery that had sliced my body open less than 48 hours earlier, and the disregard made my breath shake uncontrollably. Then he revealed the next piece of his design. I took the joint savings, he said. All of it. My heart dropped into a void so deep, I thought the world had tilted beneath me, and a soft, broken gasp escaped before I could stop it. Our money was not being used correctly. I made the responsible choice. Responsible. The word echoed in my skull like mockery, each repetition twisting deeper with a bitter sting. He continued speaking, each sentence unraveling a new thread of his betrayal. He had transferred the funds that morning. He had already changed the locks on our apartment. My belongings had been moved into a storage unit. He paid for only 1 month in advance. After that, the contents would be auctioned. The cold efficiency of it made my chest tremble with a mix of fear and disbelief. He watched my reaction the way one might observe a minor inconvenience. There was no remorse, only calculation. You always survive, he said. You will manage. You do not need me. It was meant to sound logical, but the truth beneath it was far crueler, and my breath hitched with a quiet, wounded sound. He believed I had no ability to stop him, and the certainty in his voice made something inside me crack, not with weakness, but with the first spark of a strength he had never imagined. My knees buckled under the weight of his certainty. The room swayed, my vision narrowing at the edges, a soft, frightened gasp slipping past my lips. I pressed a hand against the wall for balance, but he did not step toward me. He simply continued, as though my pain were an irrelevant detail in a script he had already finalized, and the coldness of it sent a trembling shiver through my chest. Then he delivered the line that revealed everything he truly believed. I am giving you a chance to rebuild yourself. You should thank me. Thank him. For the isolation. For the theft. For the abandonment. For his belief that I was too weak, too broken, too dependent to fight back. Each word echoed inside me with a stunned, breathless ache, almost a quiet weeping inside my ribs. He stepped outside moments later, loaded his suitcase into my Jeep, and climbed into the driver's seat beside the woman waiting for him. She looked at me through the windshield with a faint smile, unaware that she was participating in an act of cruelty far larger than she understood, and the sight sent a sharp, wounded sting through my chest. They drove away without looking back. He believed every variable favored him. He believed every escape route was sealed. He believed I was immobilized by weakness and medication. He believed that the trap he constructed would hold me until he was safely out of reach. Each assumption echoed through the cabin like mocking laughter, tightening the knot in my throat. He had no idea that the most important part of the cabin, the part he never noticed, was already waiting for me in the next room. A thin tremor moved through my legs as I sank into the wooden chair near the kitchen, the pain from my incision radiating outward in slow, burning pulses. For a moment, exhaustion pressed against my ribs with such force that breathing felt like a chore my body was reconsidering. A soft, shaky exhale slipping out as my vision blurred. Yet beneath that physical weakness something older and quieter stirred. Something woven into me long before my husband ever learned how to exploit my gentleness. My grandmother's cabin had always carried the scent of pine sap and earth. Even in winter, even now. When I closed my eyes, I could almost hear her voice as clearly as the crackling of the stove, and the memory brought a faint, aching awe from somewhere deep inside. She had been a woman who survived loss, survived disappointment, survived a marriage that took more from her than it ever gave. She never lectured me about strength. She lived it quietly, consistently, shaping her resilience into the air we breathed whenever I visited. One summer when I was 12, she placed an axe in my hands and taught me how to split wood. I remembered how the handle felt heavy and awkward, how she stood behind me with steady hands guiding mine. "You do not need power to break something open," she had said. "You need accuracy. You need patience. You need to understand where the weakness already lives." The memory returned now with a warm, bittersweet breath, the kind that stings and comforts at the same time. At the time I assumed she was talking about logs. Years later, I understood she had been teaching me the anatomy of strategy. She understood that brute force often failed, that sharpness of mind could split apart anything built on lies. Those lessons had carved themselves into my bones, even if I forgot them while trying to hold together a marriage with a man who chipped away at my confidence piece by piece. My grandmother had warned me to trust my instincts, had told me that the body recognized danger long before the mind allowed itself to name it. I remembered brushing off those words when she whispered them at my wedding, her voice low, her expression unreadable, a memory that now made my breath tremble with regret. Now, sitting alone in her cabin, I finally recognized that she had seen what I refused to see. My husband's trap was not clever. It was familiar. Men like him always underestimated the quiet woman beside them, the one who listened instead of shouted, the one who endured instead of retaliated. He believed endurance meant lack of power. He believed silence meant surrender. He believed resilience meant dependence, making a faint, bitter laugh rise in my throat. He had forgotten that survival was not passive. Survival required observation. Survival required adaptation. Survival required an intimate understanding of pressure and timing. Each truth settled into me with a steadying breath, as though my heartbeat were remembering its purpose. I pushed myself upright with a slow breath, gripping the edge of the table until the dizziness settled. A faint hum filled the cabin, almost imperceptible beneath the crackling of the fire. It came from the far wall, where a metal box hung beneath a shelf lined with old hiking maps. My brother had installed it years ago, a precaution for emergencies. A satellite phone wired into the cabin itself, untouched by the weak signals that failed to reach us in the mountains. My husband had forgotten it existed, or perhaps he never noticed it at all. The realization brought a soft, incredulous breath, half relief, half trembling laughter. That small oversight, his belief that the world revolved around the devices he managed, was the first sign that his trap had holes. My hand brushed the receiver, the cold metal grounding me in the present. It was heavy, dependable, unaffected by distance or storms. When my brother installed it, my grandmother insisted it remain even after he offered to remove it. "You never know when isolation will be dangerous," she had said. She had known more than she ever revealed, and the memory tightened my throat with a quiet, grateful ache. As I stood beside the phone, another memory surfaced, one that struck with the clarity of lightning. When I was 17, I had broken down after my first heartbreak. My grandmother sat with me on the cabin porch and said, "Pain is information. Do not let it silence you. Let it redirect you." She told me that every betrayal carried a message, not about weakness, but about where to build the next layer of armor. The sting in my abdomen, the cold sweat still lingering on my forehead, the echo of my husband's last cruel smile, these were not signs of defeat. They were information. They were direction. And the realization filled my chest with a trembling, determined breath. A shift rolled through me like a slow, controlled flame, burning away the haze of self-blame he had layered onto me over the years. I saw the patterns now with painful clarity, a clarity that made my breath quiver with both anger and awakening. The isolation was not accidental. The removal of my phone was not protective. The seizure of our money was not a temporary mistake. Each action was a step in a strategy he believed would free him from consequences, and the realization sent a soft, trembling ache rippling through my chest. But he had underestimated my history. He had underestimated the mind shaped by a woman who survived her own storms. He had underestimated the spine my grandmother had spent years strengthening in quiet, steady ways. His mistake was assuming I was still the version of myself he sculpted through criticism. He did not know that the real version, stronger, sharper, waiting beneath the surface, had begun to re-emerge, rising with a slow, steady breath that felt almost like a quiet awe of recognition. I tightened my hand around the edge of the counter and straightened my posture inch by inch. The room steadied around me. The fire warmed the air. Snow whispered against the windows. The isolation he intended as my cage was transforming into my war room, and the thought sent a faint, determined hum through my pulse. For the first time since surgery, the tremble in my hands faded. A plan began to take shape, not born from desperation but from clarity. Each breath felt steadier than the last. My body remained fragile but my mind was sharpening with every second, each inhale filling me with quiet fire. He expected me to break. He expected me to wait helplessly. He expected me to survive quietly. My grandmother did not raise me for quiet survival. She raised me for decisive action. The pain, the isolation, the betrayal, everything he intended to weaken me, was becoming the foundation of something he never anticipated. I was no longer the victim in his story. I was the strategist in my own, and the realization made my throat tighten with a fierce, breathless rush. A quiet strength settled inside my chest as I stared at the satellite phone mounted on the wall. Its presence felt almost unreal, as if it had waited for this exact moment, untouched and unnoticed by the one person who believed he had accounted for every detail. My husband prided himself on control, on predicting outcomes, on mapping scenarios where he always emerged superior. Yet he had never bothered to understand this cabin or the history woven through its walls. He did not value what did not serve him. He never looked closely at anything that was not his creation. That blind spot was the beginning of his unraveling, and the thought stirred a soft, incredulous laugh in my throat. The satellite phone was not the only secret the cabin held. A thin layer of dust covered the wooden desk in the corner, but beneath that dust rested a laptop he never knew existed. I kept it here for work during extended stays, hidden beneath a stack of my grandmother's notebooks, handwritten pages filled with her stories and memories. No one would have thought to look there, least of all a man who never learned to read the subtleties of the woman he married. My hand trembled slightly as I opened the laptop. The familiar glow washed over my face, illuminating the dim room. The connection came through the hotspot device stored in the same drawer, small enough to be overlooked, strong enough to reach through the surrounding mountains. The screen flickered as inbox notifications surfaced, each one a reminder that the world he tried to cut me off from was still accessible, still listening, still mine to reach. Relief pulsed through me in a soft exhale. The first name I searched was one I memorized months earlier: Margaret Reeves, private investigator, former NYPD detective, sharp enough to see patterns long before I admitted their existence. Hiring her had been the first quiet rebellion I ever committed. It happened on a night when my instincts screamed louder than my excuses, and recalling that moment now sent a tiny, trembling awe through me. Margaret's voice during that first call was firm, controlled, and painfully direct. "You are not imagining things," she said. "You are identifying inconsistencies." Her certainty made my throat tighten with both fear and relief. Her investigation had revealed more than I expected. Receipts from hotels, text exchanges that should never have existed, financial transfers he had hidden beneath layers of digital misdirection. She had compiled every detail into a folder labeled confidential, which now sat inside my email like a silent guardian, steady and loyal. I opened the folder now, each document reminding me that while my husband believed he was orchestrating a clean escape, evidence of his cruelty had already been preserved. Screenshots of messages where he called me an emotional burden. Records of transfers siphoning money from our savings. Pictures of him entering hotels with Natalie. Patterns of lies so consistent they formed their own map. Seeing it again made my breath shake with a mix of pain and vindication. He thought he was smart. He never understood that real intelligence involves foresight, not arrogance. A truth that made a soft, bitter laugh flutter from my lips. Then I clicked another name, one that anchored me, Garrett. My brother. The first person in my life who taught me that loyalty was not something you needed to earn. It was something you deserved by existing. Thinking of him brought warmth to my eyes and a trembling breath of relief to my chest. Garrett had installed the satellite phone after our grandmother passed, determined that the cabin remain a safe place rather than an isolated one. He also knew my husband well enough to mistrust the way he treated me. I remembered the way they interacted. Two men circling each other, one trying to assert dominance, the other calmly refusing to yield, and the memory stirred a quiet, grateful ache in my chest. Garrett had seen the danger long before I was ready to acknowledge it. I pressed the receiver to my ear. The dial tone hummed steadily, grounding me. My breath came shallow at first, then deepened when the phone began to ring on the other end, each ring tightening the knot of fear and hope in my throat. After 4 rings, his voice burst through, sharp with urgency. Brooke? Where are you? I have been calling your cell for 2 days. The relief in his tone cut through me more deeply than the pain in my abdomen, making my breath hitch in a soft, trembling exhale. Garrett, I whispered, steadying my voice as the dizziness swayed through me. I need your help. The quiet that followed was not hesitation, it was calculation. Garrett processed information faster than anyone I knew. I heard the clatter of his laptop keyboard as he prepared to act before I even finished speaking, and the sound filled my eyes with a fragile, grateful warmth. Then came the final part of my hidden arsenal. My lawyer. Not a divorce lawyer. Not yet. A specialist in financial abuse, someone who understood the patterns of men who weaponized money against their spouses. I had contacted her weeks earlier when Margaret's findings became too detailed to ignore. Her name was Julia Brennan, and she had walked me through legal frameworks I never imagined applied to my life. Financial abuse, unauthorized transfers, isolation of a vulnerable spouse, abandonment with medical risk. Her voice echoed in my memory now. If he acts on any of these patterns again, we can file for protection. You will not need to wait for permission to defend yourself. Hearing her words in my mind brought a soft, steadying awe to my breath. This morning, while he believed I was asleep, I had used this hidden laptop to message her. She already had the documents ready, emergency protections, asset freezes, legal notices. All they needed was activation, and the thought made my pulse flutter with purpose. The pieces were all here. The satellite phone he forgot existed, the investigator he never knew about, the lawyer he underestimated, the hidden laptop he never discovered, the brother he dismissed, the evidence he created through arrogance. Each one formed a stepping stone across the chasm he expected me to fall into, and the realization filled my chest with a rising, determined breath. Pain radiated through my abdomen again, forcing me to grip the edge of the desk. But beneath the pain, a steadier sensation grew. A quiet certainty, a strategic calm that reminded me of my grandmother's voice. You only win when you understand the battlefield better than the one who sets it. Her wisdom echoed with a soft, emotional sting, steadying me from within. My husband believed the cabin was his battlefield. He believed isolation would silence me. He believed his escape plan could not be undone. He did not know that long before he set his trap, I had already built an exit he could not block. He did not know that while he drove toward paradise, I was reaching for the one network he could never sever. He did not know that by the time he stepped into the airport, the first domino of his downfall would already be falling. He believed I was powerless, and the memory of his confidence made a bitter, breathy laugh slip through my lips. He forgot who raised me. He forgot who I became before he tried to reshape me. He forgot that survival is only the beginning of strength. The cabin felt colder as the reality of what needed to happen settled into my bones. Exhaustion clung to my limbs, but clarity sharpened my thoughts with a precision I had not felt in months. My breath moved slowly, each inhale deliberate, each exhale steady, as my fingers hovered above the keyboard of the hidden laptop. My husband believed he had left me powerless. He believed isolation erased my ability to respond. Yet every part of my grandmother's teachings reminded me that power is rarely loud. It sits quietly inside you until the moment you choose to use it. A truth that warmed my chest with emotional heaviness. I opened a document titled Legal Response Package, one my lawyer had prepared weeks ago. The bold headings formed a map of options I hoped I would never need. Now they formed the blueprint of his downfall. My pulse quickened, but not from fear. From purpose, a deep, quiet purpose that hummed through me like a living heartbeat. The first step was the simplest: reporting unauthorized financial activity. My husband had drained our joint savings account, moved funds into a private account without my consent, and used those funds to finance a luxury trip with another woman. Financial institutions respond swiftly when fraud touches international travel. His arrogance made him careless. He believed marital status would shield him from consequences. He did not understand that intent mattered more than vows he had already broken, and the realization sent a faint, bitter tremor through me. I drafted the report quickly, attaching screenshots of our joint account balances before and after the transfers, along with the documentation Margaret had gathered that proved I had not authorized any of it. The investigator's notes were detailed, precise, a silent witness to the financial betrayal he had attempted to mask. I submitted the report electronically. A confirmation number appeared on the screen, glowing like the first light of dawn, making my breath hitch with a trembling sigh of relief. The second step required coordination with my brother. I lifted the satellite phone again, feeling the weight of it in my hand. Garrett answered on the first ring, his voice sharp enough to send a small awe of relief through my chest. "Tell me what to do," he said, his voice steady, controlled. "I need you to call airport security at the international terminal," I replied. "There is a flight leaving tonight for the Maldives. He is on it. Report unauthorized use of shared funds. Report suspicion of financial fraud related to international travel." Garrett did not hesitate. "I am already at my computer. I will make the call now." "What else?" "After they flag him," I said, "I need you to forward the investigators folder to the airport's compliance department. The email address is in the file I sent you." He exhaled sharply, the sound carrying equal parts anger and resolve. "They will not let him board. Not with evidence like this." A small tremor ran through me. "That is the point," I whispered, my voice catching softly. The third step involved activating the emergency asset freeze. The process was intricate, but my lawyer had prepared every document in advance. Because Margaret had identified months of suspicious financial behavior, Julia had advised filing for protection even before this moment. I had hesitated then, unsure if my instincts were strong enough to challenge the marriage I had spent years trying to preserve. Now the hesitation was gone, replaced by a steadying pulse beneath my ribs. I opened the form titled Marital Financial Protection, Emergency Order. My cursor hovered as I filled in the time and date. It required only one signature, mine. The law permitted emergency action when one spouse isolated the other, removed access to shared resources, or attempted to flee with marital assets. He had done all three in less than 24 hours, and the truth of it made my heart tighten with a quiet, shaky breath. I attached the investigators' reports, the screenshots, the timeline of events, and the digital evidence of his booking confirmation for the Maldives. The final piece was an affidavit describing how he left me alone under medical risk with no phone, no transportation, and no access to funds. Writing those sentences made my hands shake, not from weakness but from remembering the exact moment he believed he had ended my choices, and a soft, pained exhale escaped me. Once completed, I clicked Submit. A new message appeared. "Your filing is being processed for immediate review." The words pulsed on the screen like a heartbeat, steady and reassuring. The fourth step involved notifying Julia. I drafted a message summarizing everything. His departure, my location, the stolen phone, the money, the isolation, the plan with Garrett. I attached the confirmation numbers of the submissions I had already completed. Within minutes, her reply came through like a strike of lightning. "Everything is actionable. I am forwarding this to the magistrate now. Expect movement within 6 hours. 6 hours. My husband would arrive at the airport long before that, which was exactly what we needed, and the thought sent a trembling, determined laugh through my breath. Legal systems move slowly until urgency forces them to accelerate. In cases involving financial abuse, medical vulnerability, and international travel, acceleration was guaranteed. The fifth step was the most strategic, timing the hits so they collapsed upon him simultaneously. He would arrive at the airport with confidence, hand in hand with his mistress, believing paradise awaited him just beyond the security checkpoint. He would hand over his identification, expecting a smooth scan. Instead, the fraud alert would flag his boarding pass. His credit card authorization would fail due to the freeze. The airline would alert the terminal agents. The agents would notify security. Security would escort him to a private room. During that window, the magistrate would finalize the emergency protective order. The asset freeze would take full effect. The financial investigation would officially open. His private account would lock. His digital trail would be pulled for review. His travel permissions would suspend. A trap far more intricate than the one he had set for me would snap closed around him, and the thought warmed my chest with a fierce, quiet satisfaction. My pulse steadied as I watched the snowfall outside the window. It drifted slowly, peacefully, as though unaware that the cabin had become the headquarters of a carefully orchestrated strike. Every move I made remained legal, documented, justified. Every step he took moved him deeper into the consequences he created. I pulled up the final document Julia had mentioned in our earlier conversations. Emergency protective order for a vulnerable spouse. It addressed more than finances. It addressed abandonment, neglect, and exposure to medical risk. The wording was clinical, emotionless, but the meaning was unmistakable. Placed responsibility entirely on him. It acknowledged the danger he left me in. It captured his cruelty in legal terms no court could dismiss. I signed it electronically. Another confirmation number appeared. The final step of my plan was simple: wait. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the burn of my incision and the slow pulsing ache down my spine. Pain wrapped itself around every part of my body, but clarity held me upright. Power did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered through the quiet moments between breaths, reminding you that every choice you made mattered. My grandmother's voice echoed inside me. You do not need force to win. You need precision. Precision was exactly what I had delivered. He believed he was escaping. He believed he was free. He believed the Maldives were waiting to welcome him. He did not know that by the time he reached the security line, the world he built on lies and arrogance would begin to collapse around him, one legal pressure point at a time. He had set a trap for me. He never imagined I would build a stronger one for him. A thought that sent a soft, steady tremor of satisfaction through my chest. Warm airport lighting reflected off polished floors as my husband walked through the terminal with the confidence of a man who believed his future belonged to him alone. The hum of travelers, rolling suitcases, and distant announcements blended into a soundtrack that fed his sense of triumph. He adjusted the collar of his jacket, the same one I had given him years earlier, and smiled as if the world itself had opened a door for him. A smile that would have stung me once but now made me breathe out a faint, bitter awe. Beside him, Natalie clung to his arm. Her eyes sparkled with anticipation, her steps light, her posture relaxed. To her, this was a romantic escape with a man she thought adored her. To him, it was a victory march, a celebration of freedom he believed he had earned by severing himself from the life he no longer wanted. The arrogance of it all might have wrung a shaky laugh from me if I were standing there. He held both passports in one hand, flipping them open with a practiced motion, admiring the smooth pages and the promise of sun-soaked photos he imagined he would post soon. He pictured the Maldives' turquoise waters and overwater bungalows, imagining himself stretched out on a lounge chair, far from responsibility, far from the woman he had abandoned. The fantasy warmed him the way a cruel joke warms the one who tells it. He believed this was the moment he would begin again. His confidence came from the assumption that every loose thread had been tied. He believed my surgery had weakened me enough to silence any resistance. He believed the cabin's isolation guaranteed my helplessness. He believed the missing phone ensured I could not contact anyone. He believed the theft of our savings placed him beyond financial consequence. Every step he took through the terminal was fueled by the certainty that he had finally outsmarted the person he once called his partner. The false confidence would have made me laugh hollowly if I had been watching. At the check-in counter, he leaned forward, smiling at the airline representative as though charm alone could pave his path. He spoke casually about upgrades and seat preferences, gesturing with the ease of someone who enjoyed asserting importance. The representative typed his information into the system, her expression neutral, unaware of the storm gathering quietly behind him. Natalie whispered something about how excited she was to see the resort. He nodded, grinning, imagining the photographs they would take. Her in a swimsuit, him with sunglasses and a confidence he did not actually earn. He pictured how his coworkers would react when he returned tan and refreshed, spinning a story about taking control of his life. He imagined admiration. He imagined envy. He imagined applause. The irony almost made a soft, breathy chuckle rise in my chest. He believed he had built a narrative in which he was the deserving one. He believed he had outgrown me. He believed he had made the bold choice. At that exact moment, Garrett was forwarding evidence to airport officials. Julia's legal filings were being processed. The financial alert system was scanning his credit activity. Security algorithms were flagging inconsistencies in his travel data. The investigative team was reviewing the suspicious transfers. Everything he had done in secret was beginning to surface piece by piece, aligning like constellations into a picture he would never have wanted anyone to see. A picture painted entirely by his own arrogance. But he remained blissfully unaware. He guided Natalie toward the security line, hand resting on the small of her back with practiced possession. She leaned into him as though his touch held promise rather than deceit. He inhaled the scent of airport coffee and perfume, each breath deepening his sense of victory. He thought of me only once briefly as someone irrelevant now, someone who would eventually return to the apartment and discover the locks changed, someone who would realize her belongings were gone, someone who would have no access to money and no means to question him. The thought gave him a strange sense of pride, as though he had solved a complex puzzle with ruthless efficiency. His imagined triumph stirred a trembling, incredulous laugh inside me. He did not picture the satellite phone. He did not picture my brother answering on the first ring. He did not picture the investigator's file at the fingertips of the very officials who would soon approach him. He did not picture the judge reviewing Julia's filing with urgency. He believed he was untouchable. The ignorance of it nearly brought tears of disbelief to my eyes, the kind that burn with a mix of pain and satisfaction. He and Natalie reached the front of the security line. He placed his shoes in a tray, removed his belt, and pulled his passport from his pocket with a flourish. The TSA officer scanned it, nodded and prepared to wave him through. For a heartbeat, everything looked exactly as he had envisioned. Then the screen flashed red. The officer frowned, scanned the passport again, and looked up at him with a new expression, one that held no admiration, no casual politeness. Just procedure. Sir, please step aside. He tried to laugh it off. There must be a mistake, he said with forced ease, a shaky ha-ha-ha that betrayed the first crack in his confidence. But mistakes do not trigger additional personnel. Mistakes do not prompt supervisors to approach. Mistakes do not require escorts to a private screening room. The beginning of his unraveling had arrived, and he did not even know it yet. Natalie's smile faltered. She clutched her purse tightly, eyes wide with confusion, her breath catching in a tiny gasp she tried to hide. He attempted charm. He attempted assertiveness. He attempted control. None of it worked because charm is useless when data contradicts your story, ha ha ha, and even he felt the sting of that truth. He asked what was happening, his voice growing sharper, edges trembling with irritation and rising fear. The officers remained calm, professional, unreadable. Like a wall he could not push through no matter how hard he tried. They asked him to sit. They asked Natalie to wait. They asked questions he had not prepared answers for, and each one made his confidence crack a little more. When he reached for his wallet, he discovered his credit card had frozen. When he checked his phone, he found emails requesting verification of transfers. When he tried to explain the situation, his words tangled under the weight of evidence he did not know they had already reviewed. His voice wavered, a thin, desperate sound trying to disguise itself as authority. His confidence began to fracture. The realization came slowly, like frost creeping up a window pane. He had not won. He had not escaped. The world he built from lies and selfishness was dissolving beneath him with a speed he could not control. Somewhere far away, he imagined I was stranded and helpless. But I was watching snow fall through the cabin window, a quiet awe rising in my chest as I waited for the call that would confirm what I already knew. His victory had never been real. It had only been the silence before the consequences found him. A fluorescent hum vibrated through the walls of the airport screening room, a sound too subtle for most travelers to notice, yet painfully loud in a space where silence pinned every movement into tension. My husband sat in a metal chair at the center of the room, fingers tapping against his knee in a restless rhythm that betrayed how rattled he truly was. The confidence he carried through the terminal had evaporated, replaced by confusion so sharp it bordered on fear. Two officers stood near the door, murmuring to each other while glancing occasionally in his direction. Their expressions revealed nothing, which only deepened his unease. He tried to catch their attention several times, clearing his throat with the entitlement of someone accustomed to being answered immediately. Neither officer responded, and each ignored moment made his jaw tighten. Natalie waited outside the room, separated from him by a pane of security glass. Her face was pale, her posture rigid. She held her bag against her chest with both hands, as though bracing herself against something she could not yet name. A soft tremble ran through her shoulders. My husband shifted in the metal chair, forced to sit still for perhaps the first time in his carefully controlled life. He crossed and uncrossed his legs. He rubbed his palms against his jeans. He checked his watch repeatedly, muttering under his breath about delays, mistakes, and incompetence. Every tick of the second hand pressed against his nerves like a tightening vice. Finally, the door opened. A supervisor entered the room, carrying a thin folder and a tablet. His uniform bore the insignia of Homeland Security. His expression was calm, professional, and absolutely unreadable. "Mr. Callahan," the supervisor began, taking a seat across from him, "we need to discuss several irregularities associated with your travel and financial activity." My husband forced a laugh, one he hoped would sound confident, but it shook faintly at the edges. "Irregularities happen. This is just a glitch. You can clear it." He tried to smile, but it stretched too wide, too stiff. The supervisor did not smile. "We have questions regarding unauthorized use of shared funds, attempted international travel during an active financial investigation, and failure to obtain required consent for withdrawal from a joint account." The color drained from his face. "This is ridiculous. My finances are my business." His voice cracked, the words tumbling out too quickly. The supervisor tapped his tablet. "The complaint claims otherwise." He froze. For the first time, uncertainty flickered openly across his expression. "Complaint," he repeated. "What complaint?" His voice wavered like someone struggling to swallow panic. The supervisor slid a paper across the table. It bore the official letterhead of the State Financial Crimes Division. The heading read, "Report of Unauthorized Asset Transfer and Marital Financial Abuse." It bore my name. His eyes widened as he scanned it. Every documented transfer, every screenshot, every timestamp, every detail he believed was invisible. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, disbelief flickering across his face. He slammed the paper down. "She cannot do this. This is a private matter." His voice trembled with anger mixed with fear. The supervisor's voice remained steady. "Once funds enter an investigation involving potential fraud or coercion, it is no longer private." He tried again, this time louder. "You do not understand. My wife, she is dramatic. She exaggerates everything." His laugh was sharp, nervous, almost pleading. The supervisor clicked to the next page. "The report includes medical documentation of her recent surgery." He stiffened. His jaw tightened. That detail, the one he hoped would remain buried beneath his careless cruelty, had surfaced faster than he imagined. A cold sweat broke across his forehead. "She is medically vulnerable," the supervisor continued. "She was left without communication or transportation. These conditions escalate the seriousness of the report." My husband's breath hitched. a sharp gasp escaping before he caught himself. The officers exchanged glances, and the door opened again. This time 2 additional agents stepped inside. Their presence carried weight, a shift in atmosphere that left no room for misinterpretation. He stood abruptly. "I am not answering anything else until I know what is going on." His voice trembled beneath the forced authority, as if he were clinging to the last scraps of control. The supervisor remained seated, calm as still water, a stillness so unnerving it made my husband's breath hitch. "Mr. Callahan, you are currently being detained for further questioning. If you leave this room without permission, we will escort you back." The delusion of control he always clung to fractured with a visible crack. His chest rose and fell faster, a shaky inhale betraying panic he tried to hide. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small space until the agent stepped forward, limiting his movement, making him freeze mid-step with a startled gasp. Outside the glass, Natalie covered her mouth with both hands, eyes wide with dawning horror, her shoulders trembling as though she might weep. "Please sit," one agent instructed. His legs folded beneath him as though his body no longer trusted itself to stand, a soft broken sound escaping him as he hit the chair. The supervisor tapped the screen again. "A temporary asset freeze has been issued on all accounts under your name. This includes the private account you opened without your spouse's knowledge." The blood drained from his face. "You cannot touch that account." His voice cracked, raw with disbelief. "We already have." He gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles went white, his voice shaking as panic pulsed visibly through him. His jaw clenched and unclenched, his eyes darting around the room as if searching desperately for escape that did not exist. "Additionally," the supervisor continued, "a protective order is being reviewed by a magistrate. If approved, it will restrict your travel and require immediate surrender of your passport." He shook his head violently, panic lacing every movement. No, this is wrong. She would not." "She did," the supervisor interrupted softly, "and she provided documentation supporting every claim." Rage surfaced next, a thin mask stretched over fear. "She is manipulating you. She is good at acting helpless." The words trembled, revealing far more vulnerability than he intended. The supervisor stared at him evenly. "She contacted authorities using a satellite phone installed for emergencies. She described her condition and isolation in detail. Her surgeon verified the severity of her recovery. Your actions placed her health at risk." His breath stuttered, a choked sound as though fear tightened around his throat. For the first time, real fear broke through the cracks he spent years sealing with arrogance. He whispered the words, barely audible. "This cannot be happening." But it was happening, and he felt every second of it sinking into him like ice. The door opened again. A uniformed officer stepped in, holding a small device. "Sir, your passport has been flagged. You are not permitted to leave the country." He shook his head. "I already checked in." His voice trembled with disbelief. "Your status has changed," the officer replied. Natalie, trembling outside the room, watched as the agents approached him. She took a step back when she saw the cuffs, her breath catching in a small awe of shock. He stood only when they lifted him by the arms. The panic he had tried to conceal erupted into his voice, rising high and raw. "You are ruining my life. She is doing this to punish me. She wants revenge." The words broke apart, half accusation, half desperation. The supervisor responded calmly, almost gently. "She wants safety." That single word hit him harder than any accusation. They guided him toward the door. His head jerked toward the glass, toward Natalie, toward the life he believed he deserved. She looked away, tears gathering beneath her lashes, her silence trembling through the glass like a final goodbye. His voice rose in a strangled plea. "Natalie, do something. Tell them." But her silence cut deeper than the metal tightening around his wrists. The agents led him through the terminal. The polished floors that once reflected his triumph now reflected his downfall. Passengers stared. Phones rose discreetly. Whispered conversations followed their path. This was his new audience. Strangers watching the unraveling of a man who believed he was untouchable. Every step he took was a step into the consequences he had written for himself. His world collapsed not with violence but with precision. Paperwork. Evidence. Timing. Truth. The same tools he thought made him powerful had become the reason he fell. And as he disappeared behind the security doors, surrounded by the officers he once believed he would never face, one truth settled unmistakably into the space he left behind. He had not been defeated by force. He had been defeated by the woman he believed was powerless. Warm light flooded my hospital room when I opened my eyes, a stark contrast to the dim quiet of the cabin. The sheets beneath me were crisp, the air sterile, and for the first time in days, I felt the faint outline of safety pressing gently around my body. Machines hummed beside my bed in soft, steady rhythms, monitoring a pulse that no longer raced with fear. A nurse moved quietly near the doorway, adjusting my foreline with practiced calm. The subtle scent of antiseptic filled the air, replacing the cold bite of mountain wind. A soft sigh escaped me, part relief, part exhaustion, part weeping gratitude for finally being somewhere warm. The last thing I remembered before arriving here was Garrett's steady hands guiding me into his truck, and the concerned voice of the paramedic he brought with him. Fever had blurred my thoughts into fragments. Snow against glass, firelight flickering, my brother's voice insisting I stay awake. But now clarity settled slowly, like sunlight warming frost into water, easing into my mind with a soft awe of relief. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts as my surgeon stepped into the room. Her presence carried the same grounded strength I had sensed the morning she explained my recovery instructions. She approached the bed, her expression a mixture of relief and restrained anger, the kind that made my chest tighten with weeping gratitude. "You are incredibly lucky," she said gently. "Your incision shows early signs of infection, but we have caught it in time." Another 12 hours alone in that cabin, and the situation could have been very different. Her words did not feel dramatic. They felt truthful, heavy, and terrifying in a way that no betrayal ever had, sending a trembling shiver through me. She reviewed my chart, then sat beside me, folding her hands. "I read the details of what happened," she continued. "No one recovering from emergency surgery should ever be left without access to medical care or communication. What he did was not neglect. It was dangerous." Validation washed over me like a balm I did not know I needed. For months I had carried the weight of his cruelty in silence, forced to reinterpret every wound as something I should endure. Hearing a medical professional place firm language around his actions loosened a knot inside me I had held for too long, and a quiet breath escaped me, edged with emotion. The door opened again and Garrett stepped inside. His eyes searched my face with the kind of worry only family can hold. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and wrapped his hand around mine, the gesture steady, protective, grounding. "You scared me," he said softly, his voice thick with exhausted affection. "But you are safe now." For the first time since the surgery, I allowed myself to exhale without fear of what came next, the breath trembling out of me like a soft weeping sigh. Garrett pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down, his posture tense until he saw the small smile I managed to form. Only then did he relax, though the shadows under his eyes revealed the hours he spent fighting on my behalf. "I talked to Julia," he said. "The protective order is active. The asset freeze is in place. Everything is moving exactly as it should." The information settled around me like a warming blanket. Stability was no longer a distant hope but a present reality, held together by evidence, law, and the unwavering support of the people who refused to let me disappear into isolation. A nurse entered with medication and a fresh bandage. As she worked, she spoke with quiet reassurance. "You are healing well," she said. "Your body just needs time and rest. Let us take care of you now." Her words, simple as they were, struck something deep within me. Rest, care, safety. These were not luxuries. They were necessities I had been denied for far too long, and a soft emotional ache rose in my throat. The day unfolded gently. Nurses checked on me regularly. The surgeon returned with updates. Garrett remained by my side, sometimes telling stories to make me laugh, sometimes simply sitting in silence so I would not feel alone. Each interaction built another layer of stability, each moment reminding me that healing involved more than medical intervention. It involved being seen, being held, being understood. As the sun began to set, painting gold across the walls, Garrett stood to leave only long enough to bring food from the cafeteria. Before stepping out, he paused at the doorway. "You know," he said, gripping the frame lightly, "you did more than survive what he did. You stopped him. You protected yourself. You protected your future. That is strength, Brooke." His words landed softly but deeply, warming the cold places inside me with a gentle awe of relief. When the room fell quiet again, I stared at the faint reflection of myself in the window glass. My face looked pale, tired, swollen from tears and exhaustion. Yet beneath all of that, I saw a woman who had endured darkness and still carved out a path to safety. A woman who had been abandoned but not defeated. A woman whose story had shifted from survival to reclamation. The monitors beside me continued their steady rhythm, each beep a gentle reminder that life was stabilizing, that the worst had already passed, and that I was being held in a place where harm could no longer reach me. Strength did not always look like standing tall. Sometimes it looked like lying in a hospital bed, finally surrounded by people who refused to let you fall, letting tears slip quietly while whispering to yourself that you made it through. The mediation room felt colder than any hospital corridor I had walked through. Its white walls held no warmth, no softness, only the sterile neutrality of a place designed for conflict. A long wooden table stretched between two sets of chairs, and on its surface lay folders, pens, and documents that would decide the fate of a marriage already shattered beyond repair. A faint tremble moved through my chest as I stepped forward, a soft weeping breath catching before I steadied myself. Julia stood beside me, calm and composed, her presence steady as a heartbeat. She placed a hand on the back of my chair before I sat and whispered, "You are in control here. He cannot diminish what you already survived." I nodded, my fingers brushing the smooth surface of the table. My abdomen ached if I shifted too quickly, but the pain no longer influenced my strength. It simply reminded me of how far I had come, stirring a quiet awe inside me. The door across the room opened. My husband stepped inside, escorted by his lawyer. Gone was the confident man who strutted through airports and doorways. His shoulders sagged. His eyes darted around the room with nervous calculation, and a faint tremor moved through his left hand as he tried to straighten his shirt. His appearance held the remnants of arrogance, but the foundation beneath it had cracked, leaving him looking almost unrecognizable. He glanced at me briefly, the flicker of shock in his eyes, seeing me upright, stable, and collected, was the first fracture in his composure. His breath hitched in a tiny sound he attempted to swallow. He sat down slowly, his lawyer whispering something to him, but he barely seemed to hear it. His gaze remained fixed on the folder before him, the one containing evidence he never believed I could gather. His jaw clenched, his throat moving with a dry swallow. The mediator, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and unshakable poise, began the session. "We are here to discuss financial misconduct, marital abandonment, and the proposed settlement terms," she said. "Both parties will have an opportunity to speak." Her calm voice anchored the room, but the tension sat between us like a physical weight, making the air heavy enough to draw shaky breaths. Julia opened her folder and slid several documents across the table. "These are the verified transfers from the joint account," she said. "These show unauthorized withdrawals and concealment of marital assets. Here is the medical report confirming the severity of my client's condition during the period of abandonment." My husband shifted in his seat. His jaw tightened as the mediator scanned the documents. A faint flush crawled up his neck, exposing nerves he could not hide. His lawyer cleared his throat. "There are misunderstandings here." Mr. Callahan acted under stress and Julia interrupted smoothly, her tone razor-sharp. "Stress does not justify isolating a spouse recovering from surgery or stealing funds to leave the country with another woman." A harsh blush deepened across his face, his fingers fidgeting helplessly. The mediator turned to him. "Mr. Callahan, you will have the opportunity to respond. But first, Mrs. Hawthorne may speak." I inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of every memory I carried. Every dismissal, every cruel remark, every moment he believed I was too small to fight him. The breath shook through me, but my voice rose steady. "My intention," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor beneath it, "is not revenge. My intention is acknowledgement. You left me alone in a cabin with no phone, no transportation, no access to funds, and an incision that could have reopened at any moment. You took our savings, changed the locks, and claimed I would survive because I always did. You told me I should thank you." He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the table. A faint tremble ran through his shoulders as though he struggled to keep control. "I did survive," I continued. "Not because of you but in spite of you. And now I am protecting what remains of my life." The words surprised even me with their calmness, stirring a soft emotional ache that pushed against my throat. He lifted his eyes to mine then, and behind the cracks in his arrogance something deeply rattled showed through. "You are blowing this out of proportion," he said, his voice strained, a nervous quiver slipping into the syllables. Julia placed a document in front of him. "These are your text messages with your mistress," she said. "This one in particular describes your plan to leave your wife at the cabin for several days because it was, in your words, perfect timing for a clean exit." His face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again as though the words refused to come. The mediator raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Callahan, is that accurate?" He opened his mouth but no words came. A strangled silence filled the room, louder than any accusation, echoing between us like a final judgment. Finally he managed to say, "I did not think she would be in danger." His voice cracked mid-sentence, thin and defensive. Julia's tone remained calm. "Medical professionals disagree. You were given explicit instructions about her vulnerability. You chose to ignore those instructions." He leaned forward suddenly, desperation cracking his voice. "Brooke, please. You know I was unhappy. You know I needed something more. I made mistakes, but you are turning them into crimes." His voice trembled at the edges, one half pleading, one half angry, both unraveling as he spoke. My head remained steady. "I am not turning anything. I am revealing what you tried to hide." His breath quickened, a thin, shaky rush of air betraying panic he could no longer disguise. The man who once told me I was a burden now looked like someone struggling to hold together the image he built. His lawyer whispered urgently to him, but he could not pull his focus away from me, his eyes flickering with disbelief. "Everything I did," he said quietly, "was because you changed. You were not the same woman I married." A calm washed over me, warm and steady, almost bringing a soft awe from my chest. "I changed because I had to survive being with you." He flinched as though struck, shoulders jerking as his breath stuttered. The mediator folded her hands. "The facts support Mrs. Hawthorne's filings. We will proceed with the settlement terms unless there is objection." His lawyer quickly shook his head. "No objection." Desperation rose in his expression. "So that is it?" he asked, voice cracking, the sound trembling like a weeping protest. "You want to destroy me?" "No," I said. "You destroyed yourself. I am simply choosing not to carry the ruins." His composure shattered then. Shoulders slumping, eyes glossing with the realization that nothing he said would restore the power he lost. The downfall he experienced at the airport had been public, but this was intimate. Quiet. Complete. The mediator signed the last page. Julia nodded at me. The room exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt entirely free from the weight of him. He had broken himself long before he ever tried to break me. Weeks passed with a steadiness that felt almost foreign after so much chaos. Each day arrived without the tension that once lived beneath my skin, without the constant bracing for his voice, his criticism, or his disdain. For the first time in years, silence felt peaceful rather than dangerous. It carried a softness that allowed my body and mind to heal in ways I never expected, and sometimes the relief made a tiny breath catch in my throat like quiet weeping. The legal process moved forward with precise momentum. Julia handled every detail with unwavering focus, keeping me updated through calm, measured calls. She explained each motion, each filing, each response, ensuring I understood the steps not just as her client, but as someone reclaiming her autonomy. Her reassurance often softened the lingering tightness in my chest. The first confirmation arrived on a clear morning. The bank formally acknowledged the reversal of the unauthorized transfers. Every dollar he stole, every cent he redirected toward his fantasy life, returned to the account bearing my name. The transaction list formed a long digital trail of his deceit, now mirrored by the list that restored what he tried to take. Seeing the corrected balance did not bring triumph. It brought balance, a quiet restoration of order, and a deep exhale I had not known I was holding. His private account, once hidden, was now frozen and under investigation. His financial movements, once concealed, were now documented and under review. The freedom he believed money would purchase had become the very thing restricting him, and the irony sparked a faint, breathy laugh inside me. Soon after, the marriage legally dissolved. No ceremony marked its end, no grand confrontation, no emotional declaration. Instead, it ended with the quiet stamp of a judge's signature. A simple, decisive mark that severed years of entanglement. The official document arrived in a sealed envelope, thin, ordinary paper bearing the end of something that had once felt monumental. I held it in my hands for a long moment before opening it. There was no grief, no lingering ache, only release settling through me with a warm, trembling sigh. The divorce decree outlined the division of assets, all of which favored me due to his misconduct. He lost the apartment he once believed he controlled. He lost access to the retirement fund he once dismissed as unimportant. He lost the leverage he had spent years cultivating through manipulation. His lawyer attempted negotiation, but every effort collapsed under the weight of evidence he had provided through his own arrogance. Julia remained firm, professional, and unshakable. "This outcome is the direct result of his actions," she reminded me. "You did not win through spite. You won through truth." Her words brought a soft awe of gratitude to my chest. The criminal charges followed next. The financial abuse case remained open, but the initial findings were severe enough to warrant permanent consequences. The abandonment during a vulnerable medical state, coupled with the attempt to flee internationally with stolen funds, resulted in a formal record he could not erase. A background check would now reveal the truth he once hid behind charm and confidence. He would carry that record into every future opportunity. He would face the reality of the system he believed he stood above. The restraining order arrived shortly afterward, comprehensive, enforceable, and absolute. He was barred from contacting me directly or indirectly. He could not come within a set distance of my home, my work, or my family. Any violation would result in immediate consequences. The legal barrier offered a protection deeper than emotional distance. It provided certainty, a boundary he could never again cross. Garrett stood beside me when the sheriff's office delivered the finalized paperwork. He watched my expression carefully, searching for signs of sadness or unrest. Instead, he saw something softer, something lighter, a breath slipping out of me like quiet relief. "It is over," he said. "It is," I replied, and the truth of it settled gently into the space between us, warming my chest with a soft awe of release. Closure did not arrive with dramatic revelation. It arrived quietly, like morning light creeping across a windowsill. I realized it one evening when I sat beside the cabin's wood stove, listening to the steady crackling of the fire. The room felt warm, safe. My grandmother's quilt rested across my lap, and the air carried no trace of fear or uncertainty. Only peace, the kind that brought a trembling sigh to the back of my throat. Justice had not returned what I lost in the marriage, but it restored what I lost in myself. My voice, my safety, my autonomy, my certainty that I was never the weak one. He had underestimated me. The system had recognized the truth, and I finally understood the power of choosing myself. Justice was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a life built without him, shaped by clarity, resilience, and the unwavering belief that survival was not my weakness. It was my greatest strength. The first morning I woke up back in the cabin, the world felt unfamiliar in a way that was comforting rather than disorienting. Light filtered through the curtains in soft golden bands, touching the wooden floor with warmth that seemed to seep into my bones. For the first time in months, my breath flowed without tension, and the quiet inside my chest felt like a space finally cleared for living instead of surviving, a soft, grateful tremble slipping through me. Healing arrived slowly, and not only in the physical sense. My body recovered in steady increments, less pain with each stretch, fewer reminders of the incision each time I lifted a mug, a gradual return of strength in my legs. Yet the deeper healing came in moments that were not dramatic at all. A silent morning spent watching snowfall, the satisfaction of tending the fire myself, the comfort of choosing how I wanted to spend the day without fear of someone's disapproval. Independence returned the way dawn does, gentle, inevitable, illuminating everything once hidden in shadow. I relearned the rhythm of my own choices, I decided when to rest. I decided when to work. I decided who entered my life and who remained outside its borders. The freedom was not loud or reckless. It was quiet, grounded, deliberate. It felt like stepping back into a version of myself I once lost without realizing it. I began painting again, using the small studio space near the back of the cabin. At first, the brush felt foreign in my hand, but soon each stroke became a release. My canvases filled with colors I had forgotten I loved. Deep blues, soft greens, warm earth tones. I painted mountains, forests, and fragments of emotions I did not have words for. The act of creation reminded me that my identity had never belonged to someone else. It had always been mine, waiting patiently beneath the layers of doubt and control. A new purpose took shape as well, not one dictated by obligation but by choice. I started volunteering twice a week at a women's support center in town. Many of the stories I heard there carried echoes of my own, though each was unique in its pain and complexity. I listened, offered support, and helped navigate the same systems I had once faced. I never shared the details of my own experience, unless it served to lift someone else out of the fog they were trapped in. Purpose, I learned, was often born from places that once broke us. Evenings in the cabin felt different now. The silence no longer held fear. Instead, it offered reflection. I read my grandmother's journal often, her words comforting, her wisdom grounding. She had survived a life far more difficult than mine, and she rebuilt herself with quiet determination. I understood her now in ways I could not when I was younger. I understood why she left me this cabin. I understood why she believed I would need its refuge someday. It was not simply a place to hide. It was a place to rebuild. Emotional peace arrived slowly, like a tide easing back into shore. It was not a single moment of clarity, but a collection of small realizations. The first time I laughed without hesitation. The first morning I woke without dread. The first time I looked at my own reflection and recognized strength instead of shame. The first moment I allowed myself to imagine a future not defined by what I escaped, but by what I could create. There were still days when memories resurfaced, sharp as glass. But they no longer controlled me. They no longer dictated my worth or my path. They were simply reminders of a life I survived, and surviving did not make me damaged. It made me capable. When sunsets painted the sky in soft oranges and fading purples, I often stepped onto the porch with a cup of tea, breathing in the scent of pine and cold air. The mountains stretched before me, vast and unchanged, yet somehow more welcoming than ever. They held no judgment, no expectation, only the quiet truth that life continues, and so could I. The peace I felt was not naive or fragile. It was earned. It was rooted in choice. It was built from the shards of everything that once tried to break me, and the realization brought a warm, trembling breath through my chest. My new life did not begin with dramatic triumph. It began with stillness, with breath, with freedom. And in that freedom I finally found myself again. A soft awe rising unbidden as I felt the truth of it settle inside me. The evening light settled over the mountains like a final brushstroke on a canvas, softening every edge and deepening every shadow. I stood on the porch wrapped in my grandmother's quilt, the cool air brushing against my skin as the last traces of daylight faded. The forest below moved with quiet purpose, the branches swaying in a rhythm older than any story I had lived through. In that stillness, the final pieces of my past settled into place, and a silent breath escaped me, almost weeping with release. I thought about the woman who had watched her husband drive away through a blur of snow and pain, believing she had been left powerless in a cabin designed to break her spirit. I thought about the version of myself who had believed endurance meant silence, who had mistaken cruelty for something she had to carry alone. That woman felt distant now, not because she was weak, but because she had not yet realized the depth of her own strength. The memory hit me gently, leaving a soft ache in my throat. The open loop that began the moment his car disappeared down the mountain road now closed with a clarity I had never expected. He had believed the Maldives would be his beginning, and he had believed the cabin would be my end. He had miscalculated both. The downfall he faced did not come from anger, and it did not come from vengeance. It came from truth, timing, and every ounce of resilience he once tried to diminish, a reality that brought a quiet, relieved exhale through my chest. The snow in front of the cabin glowed faintly in the growing twilight, each flake reflecting a world that continued to exist regardless of the storms that passed through it. I watched the last traces of sunlight disappear behind the ridge, and felt something inside me shift into place, gentle and final. The past no longer pressed against me with weight. It simply existed, a chapter closed by choice rather than circumstance, and the calm of that understanding nearly made my eyes sting. Peace did not arrive with celebration. It arrived with understanding. It arrived with silence that no longer frightened me. It arrived with the knowledge that survival was not my flaw. It was my foundation. My grandmother had seen it in me long before I understood it myself. She had left me this cabin not as a refuge, but as a reminder that strength often lives in the quietest places, a truth that warmed me from the inside out. I breathed deeply, letting the cold air fill my lungs as the night settled in full. Above me the first stars appeared, distant and unwavering, each one steady in a way I hoped to become. I realized then that I did not need closure from him. I had created closure for myself. I had chosen a future that no longer revolved around his approval, disappointment, or control. I had chosen life on my own terms, and the freedom of it sent a trembling sigh through me. The camera in my mind pulled back, revealing the silhouette of the cabin against the wide expanse of night, the glow from the windows warm and alive. This was no longer the place where I had been abandoned. This was the place where I reclaimed everything that had been taken. If this journey of quiet resilience and calculated justice held your attention until the very end, I would love to hear your thoughts. Share your favorite moment in the comments below. Press the like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more narratives of strength, recovery, and transformation. Your support helps bring more powerful stories to life, and I cannot wait to share the next one with you.